I've been kind of excited about this, looking forward to this topic and this seminar because, well, as Dave mentioned, I take a lot of the calls at Deeper Life for help, and many of the times people are very willing to help, but the phrase comes through often, I don't know what to do. So the point of this seminar is to give a few nuggets of information so that hopefully you can walk away with some idea of what to do if you're called to help someone. And like Dave mentioned, I'm glad he said it, that this is part one, this seminar this year, and the next year is part two. So I want to get into this, that even though this year's topic is kind of going to be the what do you do if someone is depressed? What do you do if someone complains about OCD? And what do you do if... So we're going to try to address some of those things. This topic here, however, I want to get into some of a summary of what's going to happen next year. So here, am I dropping out here? I hear myself coming on and off. So hopefully you can go away with a little bit of a framework to use what you're going to get in this seminar the rest of the week. So as we begin thinking about how to get started, I want to implant in your mind and that is that you need to think about teaching. Often where we run aground is that we don't realize that there's a process we have to do to help someone move from point A to point B in order to change. So that's what I'm emphasizing here in this first point, is that we need to think about teaching. And as you think about teaching, it's like going to school. You have a teacher up front, and you sit in the desk, and then you have books and curriculum, and the teacher gives assignments, and you do the assignments, and then she gives you homework, or he gives you homework, and you take the homework home, and you do the homework, bring it back, and he grades the homework and helps. And what's the point of all that? It's to help grasp a concept. If the subject has math, and you understand how to do division, well, you don't. So that's the idea. So here with these issues, to help a person through these issues needs teaching, as well as some other things. This is not exclusively teaching. So what's the advantage of teaching? I'm going to compare teaching with preaching. Both of them are biblical concepts. Both of them are biblically required, but they have different purposes and they work differently. So as you notice, teaching, and think about it, you're actually on a one-on-one situation. You are talking to a specific audience for a specific purpose. And the message you have is direct. It's focused on what the point is, what the subject is, what the concept is. And then, because it's one-on-one or a small group, you can get feedback to help you understand and realize that they got it. They received it. They heard it. And therefore, accountability is high in a teaching model. You can check to see, are they doing their homework? Are they getting the idea? And again, it's also an interactive thing. You ask questions, they answer, they ask questions, you answer. And that's kind of it's nothing new, but it's just to recognize the difference. So we think about preaching, that is simply one to many, like I'm doing right now. This is kind of in the category of preaching. I'm not going to interact with you and ask you questions. Did you catch what at this point? What do you think about this? Did you do the homework I gave you? That's not going to happen. So it's a broad message. It's designed for the general audience, reach many people. And the reception of the message, though, is questionable. If you're a mother and you had to take your child out, take care of it, you missed part of the message. For various reasons, some of the message you might not get. And therefore, the accountability of having the message received and that it's sunk in and you can move forward with it is pretty low. You just hope they get it. So in the process of getting started, I'd like us also to remember you have several objectives. And when you're sitting down to help with someone, you've got your friend, they ask you for help. So what's the objective? What are the things you're wanting to accomplish when you do this? Number one is to identify the problem or problems that the person thinks they have. And this is not only just for your sake, but for them as well. And also, obviously, you're going to provide some scriptural counsel, some advice, some tips. They got a problem, they want to solve it. You're the one that's going to help them with that. And in the process of a biblically approach to problems, there's going to include forgiveness, comfort, and answers that you're going to be providing them. And also, you're going to promote and guide and assist in biblical change. It's one thing to hear the problem, hear about the problem, identify the problem, but what's really the point is to change, because we don't want to continue in the problem. Two things I want you to consider. There's many, but these I thought were kind of important. And one of these, the legal aspects of biblical counseling, we could call it mentoring or discipleship. It's all the same. Is that there's some legal issues involved here, especially if you like what Fresh Start and Deeper Life do. We're organizations, but even if you're doing it in the church and you're doing it privately, it's important to remember that the world is watching. Maybe not specifically you and the person, but it watches religious people. It watches the church. And if you think about it, what we're doing, we're trying to help people with their emotional problems. But as you know, there's a worldly system out there to help people with problems. It's called psychiatry. It's very well documented, very well legislated, and very well instructed. It's a worldwide system. So think about it. When people encroach on a system that most of the world has adopted, you're not going to be looked upon too favorably for your alternate method. Because in that system, it's deemed to be the only answer. If you come up with an alternate answer that doesn't fit in the scheme, you need to be careful. And so there's a book out, and I put it in the list of, in your booklet, actually, I think I put it in there. The title is Legal Aspects, I think, of Biblical Counseling. It was a heads up for me and for us that we need to be careful. And the point here is don't worry about it, but here's a simple way to solve the problem the best you can, is make sure whoever you're working with, you may assume it, they may assume it, but make sure they understand you're going to be approaching them from a biblical perspective, using Bible methods and Bible concepts, and you're not going to be using psychology or psychiatry and that type of approach. Make sure they're clear on that. Because if you're not, there can be assumptions on the part of the person that's you're helping. And down the road, after you've spent 6 months or a year with them, and they say, my life got worse. I didn't get any help. You promised me that there'd be help, and I'm not helping. I'm going to sue you. We laugh at that, but it happens. So the point here is not fear it, don't be afraid, but make yourself clear to the person you're with. Even if it's somebody, a brother in the church, a sister in the church. Make sure you're on the same page. And the second thing is, remember the place the Lord holds in your counseling, in your mentoring, in your discipleship. You're there as an instrument. You're there as a tool. He's the one that makes the change, not you. You're not the most important part of the picture. The Lord is the most important part of the picture. You're simply leading this person to Him for the change to take place. And a couple things to avoid in sitting down with someone and talking with them. Platitudes and pat answers. I bump into them maybe more than I like to admit, but they're unapplied truths. That's how I'm defining it, and they're things that are disconnected from relationships. It's like you hear of someone with a problem and you lob a truth grenade at them and hope it helps them, but you're not involved. You can say something to them, but you're not walking with them. That's what I call platitudes. They're nice biblical truths that they're not attached to a person. Another thing is minimizing the problem. It's easy to say, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, that's no big deal. Others have done worse. That's a common problem. You'll be okay. That's minimizing it. That's not listening to them. And how is it for them? That's saying, you're okay, don't worry about it. Or another one is focusing on your own experiences and saying, I know just what you mean. That happens to just like that happens to me. Or let me tell you. And then you're not listening. You're telling. You're preaching. And it gets back into being a platitude. Or using sticks instead of carrots to help motivate change. And a simple, easy way to say it is, if you don't repent of this, you're going to be disciplined. Okay, that's pressure to change, but it's not drawing, it's pushing. And often that doesn't work. So those are some simple things to remember. So I also want to get into answering the question, who should help? That is often a question. And that is often a point of confusion. So the first thing that comes to mind, usually in church groups, is ministers. We'll send them to the minister. Let's go to the minister. I've got a problem. Let's go to the minister. Or one of the ministries. So is that where we're supposed to go? I hope this isn't too shocking, but no. I don't think so. I think it's you and me. Because many of, search the scripture, especially the New Testament, and Paul talked a lot about the role of one another in the church. That's you and me. Galatians 6:1 and 2 says, Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, considering yourself lest you also be tempted. Okay, who's he talking to? Did he say ministers? No, brethren. That's all of us. That's brothers and sisters. That's a generic term. So, and who are the ones who are spiritual in the church? Is it just the ministers? Are they the only ones who are spiritual? No, should be you and me. everybody in the church who is born-again believer is spiritual. Simple point, not meant to take away from the responsibility of the ministry, and this is not the point of this topic, but it's the thrust of ministry is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Ephesians 4:12, and that passage is pretty enlightening in that way. So what can help? If you figured out who, it's you and me, and it may trickle down through the ministry to get to you and me, but what can we do? Probably everyone has known a hurting person. And probably everyone here has been or is a hurting person. And when you hear about the problem, you're filled with compassion. And you try to think of some ways to comfort, some way to actually help. But in a lot of cases, we don't really help. And in some cases, we make it worse. Because our approach to helping may not be the wisest. It may be what comes to mind at the time, but if we're not tuned to some of the things that can be helpful, we can actually hurt. So, how do we get there? That's why this is so exciting, because this is one way to get some tidbits. You're going to walk away here with probably 5% of what we're going to present to you, and hopefully a couple things will sink in. If it sparks your interest, all of this is being recorded and going to be put in print, so you can expand on that interest later, and that's fills the tables out there of these. Much of the content of our bookstore is to try to help bring some tidbits of information to you to help in this process. So a couple simple prerequisites to actually help someone is, number one is love. We need to love them, whoever it is. And it goes without saying, but I was going to say it, the Bible is the foundation for all our help. And there needs to be a need for someone to carefully listen to the one. That's often what's lacking, is the ability and someone to listen. And listen for more than a minute or two. Or listen to more than 20 minutes after church. That willingness to listen. And the ability to give some wise direction. After all, they've tried some of the things in their own mind and heart and most people try something themselves when they have a problem, try to fix it themselves. And if it gets bad enough, then they'll start asking for help. So that takes some wisdom. And a primary thing at the bottom there is commitment. To be willing to be committed to them for the long haul. The heart needs to change, and they don't change. There's no buttons we have, and there's no switches to flip to change the heart. It's a process. It's a long process. So I want to also go over assumptions in all of this. When you hear these topics this week, there's some assumptions made, and I'm confident these are the things that are the assumption that goes behind. They may not state it in their topics, but this is the underlying things that are going on. One is that people have hearts. And I don't mean the beating muscular heart in your chest. That's the biblical term for the inner man, the essence of who we are. And so all of our hearts have desires. They're built in. It's the way God designed them. We have desires, with things we want. And God also designed our hearts to worship. It's a 24/7 thing. It's not just a Sunday thing. It's what we do in our hearts, as we worship something. We were, of course, designed to worship God, and we know how that got derailed. So now we're worshiping other things. And there's only two classes of things to desire. One class is the uncreated, and that's God. There's only one in that set, unless you want to consider the Trinity as three. Then the other set of everything else is the created things. And those are the things that cause us problems. When we desire and worship something that's created, that's where our problems come from. They make problems. And we turn them into idols. It's just a term for the things we want a lot, and we turn them into an idol that we worship. That produces problems with symptoms. And it's the symptoms that people normally recognize, and that's what we normally come to someone else to ask for help with. I'm depressed. Depression is a symptom. Symptom of what? Well, you need to look into that. That says when you agree to help a person with their struggles, you're stepping into their life at the point of seeing their symptoms. And your job is to understand the symptoms so you can walk back up through these steps here, reaching back to the heart. Because a person with troubles, they're unable to do that themselves. They're unable to analyze and help themselves figure out my symptoms are caused by this, and this is caused by this. Oh, okay, now we can get somewhere when we actually get back into what's causing this. So that's your job, is to help figure it out and walk back up the chain. The primary goal, though, in all this, and I gave a couple objectives, but the primary goal is a changed relationship with Jesus, and that points to who they're worshiping. Remember, there's only one class of uncreated, and that's Jesus. That's God. That's who we're designed to worship. Everything else causes problems. And those problems cause behavior that has problems. And that's usually how we see the problem, is because of the behavior that's not as it should be. But it's a real temptation to go after the behavior, to try to address the behavior. OCD has some particularly curious outworkings, and if you try to just address the curious outworkings of OCD, you're likely not going to change much. There's some things you can do that kind of seem like it alleviates it, and it could be said for probably all the other topics that we're going to deal with. The behavior is not the target, it's the heart. The heart is what causes the behavior. So how do we get change to happen? How does this technique work? The biblical model has these three basic things in it. Number one is confession, and of course that comes after recognition of the heart issue. But it comes as a confession, then a repentance, which means a change of heart, which means making an internal change. And then there is the outworking of that, the results of that, as Paul put it, is putting off the old man, putting on the new man. Developing a restored desire for God. This is putting it very simply. So I want to get into some methods. And that's the part we're not going to cover in detail this week. That'll be covered next week. But I want to give you a couple things to walk away with that you can plug into when you leave here. Number one is to begin a couple preliminary steps as you sit down with someone to get started a relationship. And also throughout the relationship, direct them to God as a helper. That's why I said earlier, a key point to remember is that you're not the one who's solving the problem. God's the one. You're an instrument helping the person reach God and get connected. Just simply, you're not the answer man. You're going to have some answers. You're going to help them find answers, but that's a key thing between teaching and preaching. Teaching will help them know how to find answers. Preaching will say, here's the answer, just take it, whether you understand it or not. Another one is to take them through the throne of grace. Prayer is vital, and not only in the beginning, but also throughout your process, because it's good to think of your partnership with the one you're helping as not only just the two of you, but God is involved. He's there right with you all the time. He's a resource available for both of you to reach out to. A key thing is to listen a lot. Listen much. Speak little. That's harder to do than it is to say. When we hear a problem, someone sharing a problem with us, and especially if it's something we've struggled with, it's hard to not just immediately start speaking and trying to give advice. So, especially in the beginning, listen much and ask a lot of questions. And as you ask questions, listen to their answers. Make sure you give questions that are not just yes or no. And often it's rare for a person to be able to describe to you the root problem. That's why they're asking you. They'll usually describe symptoms. And it's just like when we go to the doctor and we sit down and he asks you, well, how are you feeling? What's going on? And you'll describe symptoms. And you're going to him to find the root cause. Well, you're kind of in that position with your friend that he can list maybe the symptoms, but he doesn't know what's going on. So how are you going to find that out? That's a process. That's what we're talking about this week. But listen much. Ask questions, but listen a lot. And you're going to listen to their how they describe it. Listen to the nuances of what they're saying. Listen to the stories that they tell. Let them talk. And let them also know through your actions that you're interested. It really is moving you. It's interesting to you. And again, you're not the answer man, but you're a means, and that is step one, is listening. Sometimes people will feel better after talking to someone, and they know, you've probably experienced it. Oh, they listened. They got it. They understood what I was struggling with. And sometimes that may be enough, but generally not, because you haven't got to the cause. You've just listened to the problem and the symptoms. So be ready to continue on that process. But I'm assuming here in the context we're talking about that it's understood you're going to be in a longer term relationship, getting beyond the symptoms. So one of the tools that are really helpful in this method is homework. I mentioned earlier about a teacher and a student. It's like I would use the word tutoring. Tutoring is a long process that helps a person make changes. So in this process in this method, these methods we're talking about, it's going to be a lot of investigation. I guess this fits into the category of asking a lot of questions. And in order to get a good overview of what we're dealing with, there's some things you need to learn about them, more than just what they want to talk about right off. There may be a medical issue involved. They may not have thought about it. So that's good to ask them questions about, briefly, what's your medical history like? Maybe it's a person you know and you kind of know that already, but it might be good even if you know them, go through it anyway. Maybe something's changed that you didn't know about. As you talk with them, look at their body language. Sometimes you ask a person a question, they'll give you an answer, but their facial expression may have a totally different answer. If their face is all wrinkled up in pain and they're telling you, I'm fine, it's been good. Well, add that to the mix of what you're getting from them. Help it give you a context to understand the answer. You need to understand their relationship with God. And you'll probably need to do this a while, because at first you're going to get the pat answers. Fine, I love the Lord. I'm great. I've been a Christian for 25 years, and him and I go way back. And so, okay, that's the crust, then you need to start. Because obviously there's an issue with the relationship with God if there's problems that he's asked you for help with. What's the relationship with others like? How is the person really getting along with friends? And again, you're going to probably go through the standard answer and then have to get down below the surface and into some of the more real answers. And part of the process of jumping back to one of the earlier slides, is commitment. When a person senses you're committed to them, it starts to warm up things, and they can feel more comfortable and more safe to give you more than just the cover answer that's always the safe answer. And it's really, I find it sometimes hard to avoid a long dissertation of the person saying all the things that somebody else did wrong to them. And it could go back years. That may be necessary a little bit to get some context, but always in the back of your mind, be careful, because you can really turn this into a pity party that is focusing and blaming other people for the problems. And that's where it's good to understand the heart model. There's a lot of documents out there and books and some of our pocket seminars deal with the heart model, understanding that circumstances are not what cause us to do what we do. Jesus said that very clearly. It's not what comes into you from outside that defiles you. It's from what's in your heart and comes out is what defiles you. That's another way of saying it's a heart problem. It's not the circumstances. So as you're talking and interacting, again, it's good you may interpret some things yourself, but it's good to get their understanding of their perspective of their problem. They're going to have a perspective. It's going to look a certain way to them. It may look different to you, but it's really important to understand, how does it look to them? How is it affecting them? What is it doing to them? This is not the time to jump on any answer that they might give and say, well, the Bible says this, and you're collecting, you're understanding, you're getting into the heart, you're getting into them and their life. So find out what it does to them. How does it hurt? What does it do? What is the situation? How does it look to you? And then, almost equally important is, what are they doing about it? How are they responding to it? These are all the things you want to do. This is part of the method of interacting with the friend that wants your help. And a couple other key points that may launch you into some side discussions is, how do they perceive, or what do they perceive as God is asking them to do in this circumstance that's so painful? Where is God in all this situation? What does he want you to do? What is he trying to accomplish? You ask them that. What do they think about this? They may say they don't know. And I think I would accept that at first, but it might be good to just continue working on that from various angles as you can. And this is all your investigation, your detective work, to help them see things they can't see. That's why you're the one asking these questions that they might not have thought about asking themselves. And as you've experienced, when you may even think about something, but when someone else asks you the question, with the fact that someone's there present with you, it does something. And as you hear yourself speak it, sometimes it does something. It jogs us somehow. I can't explain why, but it does. So your job in all of this is to be an agent of change. You're not the changer. You're an agent. Means you're being hired for God's hiring you to be his agent. He's going to use you in this process of change. So with a lot of your getting to know the person, you may be getting some ideas of, I can kind of see something here that's going on. So that the way you can move forward then is start to get into some methods of helping them start seeing it themselves and then start changing. Especially when they've recognized that they don't have a right relationship with God. It's going to be your job to help them with that. And one point of being an agent of change is that it's an ongoing process. And that you may have to repeat these cycles a number of times. You may again have to ask, how do you see God involved in this? What is he asking you to do? You may have jotted these down, or they're in, I don't know if I put them in the notebook, but you might go through them again and again and again. But each time, it's like peeling layers of an onion. It may get a little farther. It may, because of your other discussions and the homework you've given and things you've covered, it may look different then, a little bit at a time, and a little bit at a time, to just start going through that process. But you're going to help them identify the idols, because that's several layers up, as we talked about in that first slide, that idols are the things that are the key to understanding what they're worshiping. So to identify them, it takes wisdom. It's not easy, and often there might be many. A couple quick questions. These aren't the only, but you get the idea of the kind of question we're asking. What makes them angry? What do they hide from people? What do they hide from God? What do they fear or complain about? Those are things that are, the point is those are different ways to ask basically the same question. What's important to them? What are they valuing? And then ultimately, what are they worshiping? And the bottom one is probably key. Because many of these things are where a person's identity lies. What does that mean? It means, what makes me a person? What makes me important? Who am I? We often ask the question, we hear people ask, I define myself. I don't know who I am. So that's identity. If my identity is my job, and I lose my job, I've lost my identity. If my identity is my wife, and I lose my wife, I've lost my identity. But if my identity is Christ, I'm never going to lose Christ. And then all the other things in life can be approached more stably. Doesn't mean without problems, it doesn't mean without difficulty. But identity is a key thing. But again, that's something to get into in other times. It's been covered in other seminars, but it's important to remember in this process that I'm trying to give you an illustration for. So your restoration involves confessing those idols, and I mean literally. So say the process I've just described to you You could have been at it for weeks in this iterative process of asking questions, getting answers. And all along, you're talking with them. You're talking with them. You're interacting about these things. So one of the things I think is helpful is actually be creating lists of these things that have become evident. You can create your own list. You're taking notes, and I'm going to get into that. But all along, you're taking notes. You're the teacher. The student is very important, and actually, the student should be taking notes too. The person you're helping. So these idols need to be removed, and literally, they need to be confessed, and that means likely to you because you're their friend, they're the ones they're working with, but ultimately to God because the idol is, well, God put worship of idols as on the same plane as adultery. It's spiritual adultery. So that needs to be repented of. After they're confessed. Confession means acknowledgement to God. I have this idol. I have been doing this. And then repenting of that it means more than just acknowledging you're caught. It means a desire to change. So cleansing and true change comes through repentance. 1 John 1:9 gives us that promise. If we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. This is that process. Renouncing them is like, okay, confessing is, yeah, I've got one. Repenting is, I want to get rid of it. And renouncing is more of the process of actually doing something different. I forsake that idol. I forsake that other god. It's the starting point. So what makes we actually can make change that you're going to do with your friend. So this part of the framework is kind of a framework that I'm giving you. You can plug in things from this week into this framework. But it's really important to remember that you can't just tell them to change. You're working with them to help in the change process. You need to guide them every step. You need to help them define what to do, give them concrete, practical, and attainable goals to reach, and you're helping them in every part of those, working in those goals to reach them. So, I'm going to say it again. I've said it a number of times. It's not just happening in a one-time meeting. It's not just happening in 5 meetings. It's a process. And depending on the depth of the problem, you may get to the conclusion sooner on some issues than others. Some may take quite a while. Maybe years. So a change of life happens. Simple steps. Put off the old man. Stop doing what you're doing. Get out of the old habits of what you've been doing. And that's kind of what I understand as a stronghold. I know there's different views of what a stronghold is. Some of it gets into spiritual warfare. Frankly, my personal view of a stronghold is a well-established pattern of thinking and speaking and behaving. It's been you've been for years, and it's hard to get past. So it needs to be torn down in a process. It takes a while to get into that rut. It takes a while to get out of that rut. There's no one truth that you're going to be able to give and, oh yeah, I'm done with that one. I'm ready to move on. So part of it, of casting down those habits of thinking that oppose the truth, comes by taking thoughts captive. 2 Corinthians 10:4 talks about that. And that is a process. That's part of your job as the helper to work through that process. putting on the new man. If you work at working out old bad habits, almost concurrently working at developing new habits. And that's part of what's, I'm going to get into homework here in a minute, and that's an advantage of homework. So, and then making restitution. Sometimes bad things we've done have affected other people, and sometimes pretty deeply, maybe financially, maybe other ways. So that's part of the process of changing life. It's not just acknowledging I messed up. It's, okay, I'm going to do something about it, whatever I can. Some things are unchangeable. Sometimes there's consequences that are unchangeable as a result of a person's failure. But still, at the limit that they have, they can do something. I think Luke 19 talks about the tax collector that vowed to pay back 4 times what he had taken, wrongly from people. It's an illustration. So remember, this isn't a one-time meeting. It's a process. This is tutoring. I recently watched a short video on the life of C.S. Lewis. And I found it interesting that in his early years, he convinced his father to send him to a tutor. This was not because he was having problems with anything, because he was a brilliant person. He loved to learn. And so the father granted him that request, and C.S. Lewis went and lived in the home of the tutor. Just lived with them. Ate with them, slept with them, and the tutor gave him homework, he gave him things to do, books to read, reports to write. It was intense. So that's the idea of tutoring. He came out of that process a greatly expanded person in the depth of his understanding, wisdom. I think he would say that greatly helped him in his walk with the Lord. So that just illustrates tutoring. That illustrates what we're talking about here today. And regrettably, I'm going to have to run through this last part quick. But don't fret if you can't get it all down. It's well documented in pocket seminars we've got. And when you're going to come back next year to Deeper Life, you'll get this in more detail. So we're going to use a variety of tools in the methods of being the change agent that God has hired you to do. And they're adaptable to various things you might encounter in helping a person. And they're adaptable to various personalities and situations. The overall flow is the same for all people, but they're tailored to each thing. Like a crescent wrench is not, you use it for a lot of different things, but it's the same tool, and it's adjustable, so you can use it on different sizes things. Similar idea. So, I hate slides like this, but I had to do it. Don't bother trying to write it all down. Just get the gist, get the idea. These are the concepts that are in the tools that are used in biblical counseling. There's accountability, there's admonition, chastisement, comfort, compassion, confession, love, rebuke, repentance, so forth. Just they all form the components, the building blocks of the actual practical tools you're going to use with your friend. I try to boil this down to 4 simple things. Prayer is important. It's vital, because in prayer is our way of including our other partner in the change process. And the one who's going to make the change, you need to communicate with him. Seems practical. You're including the Lord in the process. And also, as you do that, you're teaching the person you're helping that it's important to include the Lord in the process. And therefore, that's part of your teaching of putting off the old man, putting on the new, is the habit of teaching. The habit of prayer. Dialogue. This means talking, interacting, back and forth. You're not preaching. You're not handouts and then hope this fixes the problem. You're dialoguing with them. You're interacting. Notebooks. This is kind of maybe a strange thing to include as a top level important thing, but I feel it's vital to be writing, taking notes. However you take notes, but some way to take notes. Especially you as the helper, to unless you have an amazing memory, it helps remember what a discussion was about, and it can also help clarify an understanding you might have had with the person. Like if you write down what homework you've given that person, he comes back, well, you didn't tell me to do that. Oh, I did. Yeah, I took notes here. I was hoping you would take notes, but my note says I asked you to do this and this and this. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. Or they may come back and say, oh, I thought you said to do this. Well, let me check. Oh, no, well, yeah, I guess you could have misunderstood that. So just writing it down helps keep things clear. And then homework. That is a huge tool that I think makes the difference between telling the person what they need to do and walking with them. That's a huge part of the interactive process, because when you may sit there for an hour with the person and hear how things have been and talk about some things and give them encouragement, and then you're done, okay? And then you're probably going to get together and again some other time. So what happens in the meantime? Homework is the way to keep things going, keep things rolling between the times you're talking together, because it's not the time, just you meeting together is not the only time the Lord works in the person's heart or that process and progress can be made. If it was, then it's you that's the answer. But we are not the answer. Homework is the way to help that person continue the thinking process, continue their interaction with the Lord, continue studying themselves. And that's why how you craft the homework, like the math teacher, is important to how they're going to be studying themselves and studying the issues you've discussed along the way when you're not talking with them. So it magnifies your counseling efforts. It magnifies your mentoring, magnifies your discipleship. Another thing is it requires their investment in the process. It's easy to come and sit down and listen to someone who makes you feel good. And you go back and you try to make it through another week, another month maybe, but they're not really putting much into it. They just have to come and listen and maybe answer a few questions. But if you give them homework, now they gotta get into it, depending on what you ask them to do for homework. It puts them somewhat in the driver's seat, but it helps them get a sense of investment in the process. And it gives direction to your flow of help. You can kind of guide it, how you want to go. You meet one time and you happen to identify something that needs some exploration, give homework for it, and the next week you can, by what he's given you back, direct it in that direction. So encourage personal responsibility. Homework can also be not just studying something or answering questions. It can be direction to accomplish something that you've done, they need to do in the week. So, like I said, it prevents dependence on you. It illuminates progress and controls the circumstances for what you're observing and what they're observing. Again, it's like the steering wheel. You can steer things around with homework. Here's a couple ideas for homework. Journaling is a big one. If homework is big, journaling is big. Because journaling is a process of recording. Again, it can be a number of things that you want to accomplish between times. And the example of fear, perhaps the person is fearful of, I can't think of anything, but I'm fearful of a lot of things. But as an example, then give homework to say, if you have an incident where you've encountered this thing that you fear, write it down. Write down in your journal the date, the time, circumstances. What were you thinking? Why did it cause you to fear? Those are some examples. And also questionnaires. Back in there, I think we've got them. There's some homework books, and a lot of them include a lot of questions. Again, these are more questions. You can't think of every question. Sometimes a homework assignment that's pre-made can be useful. There's homework books that are categorized by certain types of problems that you can make a copy, pull it out, and then give that to the person, help them fill that out, and come back with it the next week and go through it with them. Sometimes it can reveal things. That happened to me in helping a young man. We had been interacting for 6 months about a purity issue, and then it came out because I asked a certain question. He didn't volunteer this until I asked that question, that he had a homosexual relationship with a person. And that changed our course dramatically. He was doing well, but then when that revealed, and that was a past thing, but it revealed an area that we really had to get into. So that's the idea of homework, questionnaires, journals, interaction. Ask them to interact with somebody. Maybe they've offended somebody. In the course of your talking with them, they revealed that I did something and they were really upset. But they didn't have the courage to tell them about it. Okay, your homework is to go talk to John, tell him, explain to him what this means. You recognize that you hurt him, ask for forgiveness. And so that's a homework assignment. Come back, ask him. Okay, you've got a record of the homework assignment. So how did it go when you went and talked to John? You can find out, I didn't do that. And then you've got something to talk about. Could be lists. Make lists of things that maybe offenses you've done to your wife. Maybe make a list of things that you know that you're weak in. And then you may have a recording, maybe a seminar topic or something that you think would be helpful for them. Assign them, hand it to them, listen to this, tell me what you think of it next week. We're going to talk about it. Those kind of things. Those are examples of homework. So to wrap this up, I want to again give you a few quick tips for making this go well. Don't minimize the problem. Take them seriously. Even if it's a common thing, maybe if it seems small to you, it may seem really big to them. Don't assume anything. If they say a certain thing and they're using terms that you think you know the meaning of, don't assume you know the meaning of it. Ask them, well, what did you mean by that term? You just said such and such. So what did that mean to you? Observe body language. Take good notes. Remember, you got a notebook, he's got a notebook. Take good notes. Give homework every meeting. Every time you get together, give some kind of homework for the next time you get together. And listen to their prayers. This is a unique, once a person gets comfortable praying together with you, and you can have a time of prayer afterward, maybe at the end and conclude or something, or maybe even during. I don't think it's wrong to listen to how they're praying to the Lord. After all, you're together and they can hear you, you can hear him. Sometimes those will reveal, even a word might reveal a protected area of their heart that they slip in to asking the Lord about. They're just cues. You're not going to pounce on them for it, but you don't even have to say anything about it at the time. Maybe make a mental note to write it down to talk about that area later. Because, after all, he has asked you to help. So he's given you permission to get into his life. He's asking you to do things he can't do for himself, to think about himself in ways he can't do. So don't be afraid, well, that's private, I better not go there. No, when he asks you, he's giving you permission. And don't assume that they're thinking logically, biblically, or clearly. It may sound goofy, some of the things they say, even in their prayers, but try not to chuckle at them, but use that as information to understand them more. So, a couple conclusions. So, who is needed? It's you. What's needed is time. This isn't a quick process. The goal is a change of heart. What's not the goal is a change of behavior. And think teaching. Think tutoring. Don't think I'm going to get this done with quickly. God bless you in trying to help people with the information you're going to get the rest of the week. Thank you for your attention.